Evening once again, 9th of March. As we continue talking about the Four Noble Truths, specifically now the Eightfold Path. We have talked about the right view, which in some ways really is a deepening understanding of the first three of the Noble Truths, and ultimately the fourth one as well. And bodhicitta, so forth, right thought, benefit of compassion, so on. We talked about these things and want to move ahead. Last time around, we talked about the 5 mindfulness trainings of Thich Nhat Hanh, which we reflect and refer to right action and also right speech. So we touched on right speech last time. Right speech is usually given as the third of the Eightfold Path, step in the Eightfold Path. Again, they're all interconnected. You can't really separate. There you go. There's a lot to it. And I know, sure, that each of us have given considerable thought throughout our lives to what we communicate, how we're communicated with. In this tradition, there's a number of aspects to right speech. One is that right speech also includes listening. Listening differently than we often do. That includes listening to simply understand, and also listening to try to be of benefit in some way. What is really needed here? How can I help? Rather than listening to wait for an opportunity to state our point of view, or to it's an element here. So often we listen, start to get into the fix-it mentality. Oh, I know what I can do to fix that, which is related, kind of a close relative in a way to how can I be of help. But there's a difference, deep understanding needs to be a part of the listening, without the need to respond from any egoic place, which fixing very often has, in my experience. The speech part of it, there are these aspects that are traditionally talked about. One of them is to speak at the appropriate time. And there are 5. There's that one. There's speak honestly. To speak politely is one way of putting it. The third one. To speak what is beneficial. And to speak with goodwill. And there are times when you could speak honestly, and you could speak politely, and you could speak with with benefit, and or at least with that as the goal, and also with goodwill, which to me really is the motivation. Why am I trying to put this benefit out there? Is it so I'm going to get the pat on the back? So the goodwill has, to me, more to do with where is this motivation coming from? It gets back to bodhicitta once again. But the honesty and the politeness and the benefit and the goodwill could all be there, but at the wrong time, it won't be heard. Or worse, it could be taken the wrong way, and so forth. I've recently, increasingly had that experience of thought arising in my mind that I perceive as perhaps this would be something to be useful for this person to hear. And then I ask myself, is this time for that? And very often I'm noticing, well, no, it isn't really. There's a part of me that was wishing it was because the thought is there and I'd like to be able to express it. And I think maybe it's helpful, but is this the right time? No, I need to either do something to have that time come around actively or allow it to happen on its own. So those five things can help us decide when we may want to say something, when we may not want to say something. One of the ones that's often talked about also is no idle chatter kind of a thing. And if you sort of stick with all these, and if you only speak when those five things are present, there's a lot that won't be said. And I've always had a little bit of a disagreement, I guess, with that, in that there seems to be no place in here for play, for the banter, the back and forth, the enjoyable conversation that doesn't have any deep substance, or we're not talking about serious subjects. We're just playing a bit. In fact, there was once somebody who commented on Ken's admonition against undue solemnity, because I think that we can be a solemn group at times, and that there's a time for play as well. The caveat is that play can often, we see it in kids and we see it in grown-ups as well, it can often have an edge to it that can be barbed. And in fact, there are some forms of humorous, playful banter among adults in particular that has to do with, giving people a hard time, kind of insulting them. In fact, in some places, you're not, you've been accepted by a group when they start giving you a hard time. So, there are all these subtleties that go into using these things skillfully, not muting yourself unnecessarily. I'm hearing teachers in my mind saying, be careful, Ken, you tend at times to be a bit of a clown, you overdo it. And I do, this is true, I'm aware. I don't stop though, I know I keep going. All these things are worthy of thought. There's so many other aspects to speech in a larger sense. To speak skillfully, pausing can be very, very helpful. And Thich Nhat Hanh writes about, it can be very helpful at times to write a letter rather than speak directly in situations that might be a little tense, because you can write it down, you can reflect on it, you can change it if you want to, and really be careful before you press send or before you put the stamp on the envelope and send it out. And today, of course, there are so many aspects of communication that happen so rapidly that the danger of being misunderstood, the danger of saying things we wish we didn't, not a question of being misunderstood, but just that, oh, I wish I hadn't said that, or I wish I hadn't sent that, becomes increasingly present. 100 years ago, you had to write a letter. You had to give it some thought. If you've ever read letters from 100 years ago, 200 years ago, it's amazing how wonderful and expressive and careful the language is. Even soldiers in the Civil War writing home, if you've ever read any of their letters, and I'm not talking about Colonel so-and-so, I'm about Private so-and-so. It's just wonderful to read some of the ways these expressions happen. These days, so fast. And the expectation is that we can respond very quickly. And we all know where that comes from. We can see it every day. And then there's the communication that may occur through writing a column or a book. And some of you may, in fact, have done those kinds. And then there are, of course, the talk show folks. Can you imagine presenting the talk radio people with these 5 things? You need to speak honestly. You know, if you know it's not true, you don't say it. You need to be polite in the way you do these things. If you're talking about somebody with whom you disagree, you do it respectfully. That's what politeness gets down to, is respect. You only are going to say things that are beneficial. You're not saying them for your own ego. The airwaves would suddenly become silent. It'd be wonderful not to have all that going on. Whipping up the frenzy that is coming from unskillful speech, from wrong speech, if you want to put it that way, speech that drives us to suffering rather than benefit and health and so on. And the aspect that all of the teachers that we're looking at here, and I've went through Bhante G and Thich Nhat Hanh, Gil Fronsdal, and so on. They all either directly or indirectly emphasize you got to be mindful to do any of this stuff. In order to speak with these 5 qualities, we have to be mindful of our minds, of what's going on with the thinking process. And you may recall that Thich Nhat Hanh puts mindfulness in 3rd place. It's the 3rd thing he talks about. And in the 7 factors of awakening, the first one is mindfulness. And it informs all of the others. And I think that's true as we look at these, at the Eightfold Path also, that mindfulness lies at the core of all of them, even though it's talked about later in the sequence. The practice, if you want to bring this down, how do you practice this? You practice it by being mindful of, or I do anyway, I do my best to be mindful of when feelings that might result in unskillful speech are present in me. When I am feeling anxious, when I am feeling frustrated, when I am feeling irritable, even if I'm not showing it at all, I know I'm. And if I'm engaged in talking, conversation, or for that matter, even doing what I'm doing right now, and these things are present, especially if I'm not aware of it or I'm not paying attention to it, I'm going to speak differently than otherwise, and not in a positive way. So what the practice asks of us is to, there's that pause again. Here comes, I'm wanting to say something, just keep our breath. What's going on in my mind right now? There's irritation. Do I need to say this? How do I need to say this? I mean, all these things can happen very rapidly. But training ourselves, practicing them this way to notice the state of mind that is going to inform what's coming out of our mouths. And then to be able to modify or to stop. Shantideva says sometimes you just got to be like a log. To do what needs to be done to change that. Um, and that's just an ongoing day in, day out kind of thing. You know, you're not going to do it perfectly. Can I know I'm not going to do it perfectly. Uh, but I also know that over the course of time, the capacity to see or feel, or whatever that word is, the state of mind that is present earlier and earlier, where you have the space to then speak as might be helpful, as might be beneficial, as might be from goodwill, that might be respectful. All that comes from this space. That capacity grows. I mean, of course it grows. I mean, we're practicing it. Things that we practice, I mean, we've all noticed that, you know, things that we practice improve. We get better at it by doing it. The key is remembering to do it, because it's not something that is usually talked about very much or taught. I certainly never heard about it when I was growing up. Um, so I guess I'll leave it there. There is a lot written about right speech. Uh, my mind again went to our current, particularly political culture right now. It's such a lesson in unskillful communication. Just overt, flat, knowingly lying. And then there's the aspect of hearing, accepting, and passing along. May not be no malevolence behind it, the way it may have started. You know, someone may have purposely said this to drive up the wall or to make things painful, but people here just repeat. And there are all kinds of things going on to increase that. You know, these things to keep track of what we pay attention to and look at on the news and everywhere else, and then feeds back to us what it thinks we want to hear. And we're hearing things, oh yeah, that makes sense. And then we're telling our friends about this thing that is, no, not real. So that question again from Thich Nhat Hanh, part of his talk about right thought. Am I sure? Am I sure about that? Yeah, it makes all the sense in the world. This politician that I don't like said XYZ because sounds like him. Am I sure he said it? Well, no, not really. And if that's the case, then I need not to be someone who's contributing to the ongoing frenzy. So I will bow out. Thank you. Stop the recording.